The lake that changed everything. The evening mist rolled across Mirror Lake like a gentle whisper, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of rain. Sarah pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders as she walked along the familiar shoreline path. The old canvas bag containing her few possessions hung heavy on her back, a constant reminder of the life she had been living for the past 6 months. She had discovered this hidden spot 3 weeks ago after being asked to move along from her previous shelter behind the old downtown library. The lake was peaceful, surrounded by towering evergreens and far enough from the main roads that nobody bothered her here. During the day, she would sit on the weathered wooden dock, watching the water ripple in the breeze and trying to forget about the empty feeling in her stomach. Tonight felt different somehow. The air was thicker, charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. Sarah had learned to trust her instincts during her time on the streets. They had kept her safe more than once. As she rounded the bend toward her usual sleeping spot near the old boathouse, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. Across the water on the far shore stood a magnificent mansion she had never seen lit up before. Warm golden light poured from every window, creating dancing reflections on the lake's surface. The 3-story house looked like something from a fairy tale, with its stone walls and tall windows. Sarah had always wondered who lived there, but she had never seen any signs of life. A sudden splash from the water caught her attention. At first, she thought it might be a fish jumping, but then she heard it. A voice, weak and desperate, calling out across the still evening air. "Help, please. Someone." Sarah's heart began to race. She dropped her bag and ran toward the water's edge, her eyes scanning the darkening surface. There, about 30 feet from shore, she could see a figure struggling in the water. A man, his head barely visible above the gentle waves, his movements growing weaker by the second. Without hesitation, Sarah kicked off her shoes and waded into the cold water. The lake was deeper than she had expected, and soon she was swimming with strong, determined strokes toward the struggling figure. The water was shockingly cold, but she pushed through the discomfort, focused only on reaching the man who was clearly in distress. "Hold on," she called out as she got closer. "I'm coming." The man's eyes were wide with panic and exhaustion. His dark hair was plastered to his head, and his expensive-looking clothes were waterlogged and heavy. He tried to speak, but only managed to cough up lake water. Sarah could see that he was fighting to stay afloat, his strength nearly gone. "Don't fight me," she said firmly as she reached him. "I'm going to help you get to shore." She wrapped her arm around his chest and began the slow, careful journey back to the bank. The man was heavier than she had anticipated, and the swim back felt endless. Her muscles burned with the effort, but she kept going, stroke by stroke, until finally her feet touched the muddy bottom of the lake. Together they stumbled onto the shore, both gasping for breath. The man collapsed onto the gravel beach, coughing and shivering. Sarah knelt beside him, her own chest heaving from the exertion. "Are you okay?" she asked, pushing her wet hair out of her eyes. "What happened?" The man looked up at her, and even in the dim light she could see the gratitude in his eyes. He was older than she had first thought, maybe in his 40s, with kind features and the bearing of someone who was used to taking care of himself. I slipped," he managed between coughs. "The dock was wet from the rain this afternoon. I hit my head when I fell. I thought—" He paused, looking directly at her. "I thought I was going to drown. Thank you. You saved my life." Sarah sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her clothes were soaked and muddy, her hair a tangled mess. She was probably not the kind of person this well-dressed man was used to encountering. "I'm just glad I was here," she said quietly. "Do you need me to call someone? An ambulance?" The man shook his head slowly. "No, I think I'll be fine. Just shaken up." He looked around, seeming to notice their surroundings for the first time. "You were walking by the lake this late?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. She gestured vaguely toward the boathouse. I've been staying around here. It's quiet." Understanding dawned in the man's eyes, but there was no judgment. There, only curiosity and continued gratitude. He struggled to sit up, and Sarah helped him, steadying him with her hand on his shoulder. "My name is David," he said. "David Harrison, and I owe you more than I can possibly repay." "Sarah," she replied simply, "and you don't owe me anything. Anyone would have done the same thing." David shook his head. "No, Sarah. Not everyone would have jumped into a cold lake to save a stranger. Not everyone would have risked their own safety like that." He looked across the water toward the illuminated mansion. "That's my home over there. I was trying to fix a loose board on my dock when I fell." Sarah followed his gaze, her eyes widening. "That's your house?" "It is," he said with a small smile. "And right now I would very much like to get out of these wet clothes and into something warm. But first I want to make sure you're taken care of too." Sarah started to protest, but David held up a gentle hand. "Please, you're soaked and cold and you just saved my life. The least I can do is offer you a warm meal and a place to dry off." As they stood up together, both still unsteady from their ordeal, Sarah felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. Not just for a warm meal or a dry place to sleep, but for something deeper. The way David looked at her with respect and genuine gratitude made her remember who she used to be before life had knocked her down. "There's a small boat tied up just around the bend," David said, pointing along the shoreline. "It's faster than walking all the way around the lake." As they made their way to the boat, Sarah could not help but think about the strange turn her evening had taken. She had been walking along the lake, as she did every night, expecting nothing more than another quiet evening alone. Instead, she had found herself in a situation that had changed everything. The mansion across the water no longer seemed like a distant dream. It was real, and so was the man whose life she had saved. As David helped her into the small rowboat, she realized that sometimes the most important moments in life come when we least expect them. The lake that had been her refuge for weeks had become something else entirely. It had become the place where her life took a turn toward something she had almost forgotten was possible. A future filled with hope, dignity, and the kindness of strangers who might just become something more.